I'm really glad you mentioned repressive tolerance early on, and I constantly see it, repressive tolerance playing out in all sorts of different manifestations, as you suggested. I kind of view it as a sort of pseudo-morality, in fact, right, that allows for basically you to make these decisions that to someone who isn't initiated look like hypocrisy, but if you're an adherent of the pseudo-morality, they're not hypocrisy. In fact, they're the kind of the right thing to do. Yeah. John McWhorter describes, wokeism, for lack of a better term, this sort of the party that you're describing as a kind of religion, the people who really believe in it. I would call it similarly as a pseudo-morality, a pseudo religion. He says, no, it's exactly a religion. No, what is your take on that?
No, it's a religion. Absolutely, is a religion. Marx did not outline. If you read Marx's writings before the Communist Manifesto, especially his manuscripts that he wrote, the various manuscripts he wrote in 1844, it's very clear that Marx was not outlining a political and social theory. He's outlining a theology. Very clear to me, at least. Anyway, he has a theory of being. He has a theory of mankind and human nature. He has what you would call a soteriology in religious circles, which is a theory of salvation. We're going to do the work. We're going to become socialist man. We're going to make man continuous with society, and then we'll re-achieve the Garden of Eden. We'll have the kingdom of God brought back here to earth. So he has a theory of salvation built in, a soteriology. They're all the pieces. It's an eschatological religion. In other words, it has an eschatology, it has an end times prediction. The revolution takes the place of the rapture. The socialism that follows the revolution isn't going to be everything worked out. The contradictions are going to be very apparent. That's a tribulation. But on the other end, the kingdom of God will be reestablished on earth when we have communism. So it's an eschatological faith as well. It has a theodicy, an explanation for evil. How is it that these terrible things are happening? Well, history, in Hegel's words, is using people and then discarding them. Why? So that it can continue to unfold. Because for Marx, history has a teleology, it has a purpose, it has a trajectory and an end point, which is that we're going to all become socialist people living in a socialist society where man and society are co-continuous, and we see ourselves as what, for his theory of being and human nature, we see ourselves as creators. We are subjects, and he says that what happens is that private property comes in. There's your original sin that gets us kicked out of the garden. It creates a division of labor, which is the wages of sin. In this case. And what happens with this division of property is that some people exploit and dominate other people, and they create ideologies and mythologies to justify their domination and exploitation, which is, for him, the false religion. And then what we can do is that we can do the work to change ourselves increasingly into a social being. By what? By what is work? Well, it's the hammer and the sickle. It's productive work versus this kind of managerial, lawyerly, priestly, superstructural work, as he had it. And so what do you do to do the work? Well, you have a vision in your head of what you want to produce in the world, and then you produce it. If you want to make a picnic table, you look at the tree and you get your saw and you cut the tree down and you fashion the wood and you hammer it together or whatever, and now you have a picnic table. But you saw the picnic table in your mind, or very Pygmalion-like. You saw the statue of the perfect woman in your mind, and you chipped away the marble little by little by little, and then asked the gods to bring it to life, and now you have your perfect partner that you've created of yourself. But what he says is, this means that you are the subject, and that you are creating as a subject, you have a subjective experience of the world, and you're creating an object in the world through your productive labor. That produces value, according to both he and Hegel, who preceded him. But it also produces something in which you can reflect upon yourself, a speculum, if you will. I know everybody freaks out when you say that, but it means mirror in Latin. And so you reflect back upon yourself and see yourself as what? As that which creates. Now, what he says is that this division of labor has entered the world and creates these social relations of domination, exploitation, and alienation, and so on. And by doing so, he says that the social relations limit the range of one's subjectivity. So the limits of what you can produce in your mind to create in the world, to come to know yourself, are limited by the fact of the exploitative and domineering social relations. So if you can get rid of that, which comes for him back to the ownership of private property, the abolition of private property as communism in a sentence to Marx, if you can get to that, then everybody is actually genuinely being a creator, bringing about the society and the world in which they see themselves as the creator with no God. Man has bootstrapped himself up from the animals through his productive work. And if at the end of history, which has this trajectory, the unfolding of the social relations is history. At the end of history, the social relations finally, they become stateless and classless. They cease to be rooted in domination and oppression, and we enter into the garden. This is a faith. This is a absolute religion. Every piece of a religious faith is present. It has an ontology, an axiology, an epistemology. I mean, we could just go on and on and on of all the necessary components of a theology. And Marx had laid this out and had hidden the fact that he was creating a theology because he cast down God. But what he actually put in God's place is what he called man in himself. A man that's become truly independent, that no longer needs God, no longer needs his parents, whom he was mad at because they stopped giving him money, frankly. And you know, he becomes wholly independent, is no longer dependent on anything or anybody else. But the only way that that's possible is if all the different people's subjective views align. Hence, you end up with this collectivism that becomes totalitarianism, because every man has to become socialist man through this process of spiritual transformation, through the exact kind of productive work that Marx refused to do for himself at any point in his life. And we all become socialist man. We get the correct view of how society works, and man and society become co-continuous as one object, kind of a hive mind. But this, of course, is intrinsically totalitarian. But what this also is a theory of human nature. It's a theory of history. It's a theory of creation and I don't know the word for the end, eschatology, other than say the end of the world, beginning and end of the world. It's a theory of everything, which is a theology. And the only thing that he's done is put man in the place of God, and therefore man, wholly independent, made wholly independent from everything, in the place of God, which, not to cite our you know, not that we know him, I guess, friend Alex Jones, but is satanic at the end of the, I mean, that's what the idea of Satan is that man holds himself up and we shall be as gods. And you think that I'm just being a little bit like out there now, but if you read, for example, in Herbert Marcuse, who we've already talked about, 1955, he wrote Eros and Civilization. He considered it his most important early work, or maybe his most important English work. And it's this combination of Marx and Freud into a new theory. And in it, he says that it is human beings' objective is to get back into the Garden of Eden. He actually says that. And the way that we do that is by taking a second bite of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. So this is explicitly religious. His program, Marcuse's, by the way, was called The Great Refusal. The Great Refusal of all it is. But that's actually an allusion to the third canto of the Divine Comedy, where Dante's describing the outside of the Inferno. And there's this group of people, or poor souls or whatever, that can't, they're cast out of heaven, but they can't get into hell because they won't commit to anything. And so they're walking around with a blank standard, following nothing, milling about outside the gateway to hell. And the Dante says, these are you know, he asks Virgil, who are these people? And Virgil says, well, this is the people who have undergone the great refusal. They've refused both heaven and hell because they refuse to commit to anything, so neither one wants them. And they're just stuck here, miserable forever. And this is the metaphor that Marcuse chooses for his great program. This is explicitly religious all the way down, all the way through.
So you often hear that in woke ideology, there's no redemption. Where's the redemption in this communist theology as you're describing it, or is there?
The redemption is off at the end of history. The redemption is that we will get to the perfect society if everybody participates. So you cannot redeem yourself. All you can do is take up the theory and do the work. And be on the right side. You don't get to be at the end of history or in the utopia unless we achieve the revolution and everything works out. You just have the responsibility to be on the right side of history. That's where I said there's an axiology, a theory of values here. You must be on the right side of history. So long as you are upholding the attempt to bring Marxism into the world, you're in the generally good graces of the saints or whatever, but there's no full redemption. There's just more activism.